one of the ways that we struggle with that is that, and I want to just come on to this point also, and I want to get your opinion on this,
Yeah.
is the identity of being a writer. People like so much feel like they have to live up to that identity. And I think that's the struggle, there's this idea that I really like, and it's like, it's basically just be careful that the mask that you wear in chase of your dreams doesn't become who you are. It's like, like you to be a writer, you have to become this thing, It's like the way you kind of look at the world, the way you kind of look at literature, all of these things. But often you run into the trouble of not finding a balance
Yeah.
with who you are and, what you do, and I think, there's a version of you where the dream will serve you, but there's another version where like you serve the dream. I think finding that balance is so important. What do you think about the identity of a writer? Like, how do you think we can better, or people should better, like, kind of relate to that? Like, what is the balance that you think people should strike between? I am a writer, so all I do is write, and staying in a room all day, and like the darkness, candle wax, just trying to like find the next plot point, or I am a writer, I go outside, I live life, and I bring that back.
I mean, at the very least for me personally, like, I have to balance the fact that I have to work. Um, you know, so as horrifying as it might be, I think the solution to most people's problems is fill out a job application, maybe, um, because I writing or whatever it is that you do, it can't be everything about you. Because also it never was. So you would just be trying to fulfill this bizarre fantasy. That would be entirely predicated on a lie. Like, even when I certainly had more free time to write or pursue whatever I was doing, allowing it to become my entire default self would have genuinely worked to my detriment, because I think the most important thing you can do really with anything that you do is not to have this fixed outlook of like, I must be like this, because quite simply you never were. Like, you're literally always changing. Like, even how I feel about it now has changed. Like, when I was younger, like 23 or younger even like when we met in our masters, how old I was, like 22. I certainly had the free time to write more, and I was definitely a lot more taken with it. But at the same time, I feel like I had to grow and change with my life. And like, having this expectation of yourself, or like view, I suppose, of yourself as like, oh, I'm just this person. You never were. Like, you're, with all things, we're all changing. Like, seasons change, the waves, the weather. Why not your mind as well? And in that way, like, you can't, especially if you want to make something like art or really anything, like, because everything is kind of ephemeral anyway. Becoming fixed on a specific outlook of it, ironically, becomes a bit more close to, like, that typical phrase people use for old people of like, oh, they're stuck in their ways.
You become stuck in your ways a little bit.
You become stuck in your ways.
Yeah,
really.
Yeah. I think like the way I look at it is like as like a farmer, it's like you have to have an understanding that this is something you're going to do for a long time.
Yeah.
And a farmer isn't just a farmer. Like they use that as a way to sustain their life.
Yeah.
But their life is sustained. That's the most important thing. So it's like you have to find a balance between. And I think a lot of people in this new day and age have to. I really like struggling with this. It's like this because it's we talk about it all the time, the hustle culture, the like kind of entertain culture. You have to become a certain type of way, you do this and this. But I think in that you lose the thing that you're doing it for, because obviously at the beginning you're doing it to sustain something within you that you want to be kind of, you think like you need more, you need that validation. So you go chasing that. But like the validation won't come. And if it does, it won't come in equal like, measurement throughout the whole rest of your life.
Yeah.
You need to find a balance of how you internally feel about your own life.
Yeah.
I think the best way I've found to do that is to just look at it like, it's like you're a farmer. You're just planting seeds and watching them grow. And then, this thing, if it doesn't go well, it's fine. I'll just do it again.
Yeah.
Not have this kind of like outcome obsessed viewpoint of it,
Yeah.
where you actually gain something from actually just doing the act. You know
Yeah.
what I mean?
Yeah. But it's also like, I think it's very good to have a sense of purpose for sure. Like, I mean, I think everybody kind of needs something to cling to. But your purpose isn't your whole being. And even then, purpose can be a very multifaceted thing. Like, for me, as much as, wanting to be a writer, especially when I was younger, was like, for me, the be all and end all. To be honest, now I I care more about, can I pay rent? That certainly matters. And
So it's a true. That's like a true writer.
Yeah,
It just sounds like a true writer
yeah.
would.
typical brokey, eh?
Typical writer.
But at the same time, I also think, but what matters more to me, to be honest, in the present,
Yeah.
more than writing, even, which, God, is like, am I a good partner? Like, am I a good person? Like, because I think that those things kind of, like, perhaps in the literal sense, because, they're real, they matter more. But also, like, because I've kind of grown to let go of this need to define myself by, oh, I'm a writer, whatever that's supposed to mean. And now I look at it more as like, yeah, I suppose I am a writer to some extent, at least, to the extent that I'm 30 grand in debt for a PhD now, on top of the rest of my debt. But that's kind of just one small facet of everything I do. Like, in my day-to-day, I do a bunch of other stuff. Like, I'm learning skills I never had before. Like, I'm learning to cook more as well, which I've kind of always enjoyed, but it's fun. I mean, like, but even that, like, the journey with cooking. Like, I started out as a kid, like, I could make mac and cheese. That was it. But now I make all kinds of crap.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
and that's fun.
Yeah.
That's like literally seeing change and progression
Yeah.
in my actual life, and something that I never really thought to even take note of,
Yeah.
like learning to cook.
Yeah.
I
I think
it's obviously an essential skill, but
absolutely. I think the problem comes with this like kind of like identity that we try to kind of like stay in
Yeah.
all the time. Because people feel like it's easier. Because we run into the same problem when someone meets you. It's like, what do you do? And it's like, I want to introduce myself as this thing. Oh, I'm a writer.
Yeah.
Or I'm a poet. Or I'm a podcaster.
Yeah.
Then I'm like, wait, but I also do this. I also do that. I also do that.
Yeah.
And it's like, I'm trying to like refine my whole personality, and the more interesting you are, the more you go just different parts of yourself into this
Yeah.
one sentence thing, so this person can understand you. That's just like a limit of language. I think that's just like that's not understanding that.
To be honest, I think it goes beyond just being a limit of like. You're definitely right about it being a limit of language, because obviously, actually on that topic, there was this really good line that I heard in a movie that my partner made me watch. It's called Remarkably Bright Creatures. It's from the perspective of an octopus, and like how the octopus views the strange human foibles around it. And it was something along the lines of like, you have millions of words to express yourselves, and yet communication comes with so much difficulty for you all, which essentially encapsulates what you were saying. Like, we struggle so much with our own language, one that at the very least I grew up natively speaking, and I'm terrible with it. Especially when emotions come into the picture, words fly out the window, man. Honestly, it is real hard.
This ape brain doesn't understand how to use language to
No, of course
communicate.
not. But I think as well, like even with, say for example, Gen Z, actually relating that to a thing I read in Into the Woods, the guy who wrote it, John York, I think this was his line anyway, he said that like classic tragedy was loss of life. Modern tragedy is loss of purpose. And I think we've conflated as a generation, and perhaps, this is the result of the generations that lord over us and God knows what else, but we're very set on pigeonholing ourselves, like people in our generation in particular, like maybe even just our age group of like late 20s, horrifying.
Don't just keep going.
Like hate that for us, like, but we're so fixed on pigeonholing ourselves. Like we're so desperate to have like, I am this, I am like this is how I am. There's no room for any vagueness.
How do you think we got here? Why do you think we do that?
the need to define ourselves. Maybe it is loss of purpose at the end of the day. Because in the past, even in the past like 50 years, purpose looked very, very, very different. Like, the millennials, I'm sure, can attest to this one more than perhaps anyone else alive right now. But the stereotypical path, at least in the West, of like, go to school, maybe go to uni, get a job, buy a house same year probably, with that fat salary you were making, get married and poop out a bunch of kids, and then the cycle will repeat itself for those kids. Doesn't seem to be happening too easily these days, does it? Yeah.
I think there's a lot to be said about that actually, and that's one of the things I'm really fascinated by, which is like the prolonged life kind of like of our generation. I'm really, really interested in that, and I'm trying to find people to talk to about it, because I feel like there's a lack of understanding from our part of how we got here. But I think there's people who study it and they have the understanding of it, economy, kind of like even just like how we set up our home life, our mental health, like all of these different facets of it. But I think, one of it, as we understand, is language, is storytelling. It's the story we tell ourselves about the kind of the lifestyle we're supposed to have, and where we stop it, and like how it kind of defines us. Before we end, I want to move on to another topic. We've talked very kind of broadly about storytelling and kind of purpose and just like, obviously writing. But one thing I really wanted to end on is the understanding of like, you were mentioning before about free will and like kind of determinism, like where we play a role in how we redefine ourselves and where we kind of come into play, how we kind of like define our own story. Talking about that, there's a film that we both watched that I've been waiting so long to talk to someone about this.
Yeah.
Waking Life. And so for those who've not seen it and don't understand it, it's basically this kind of like story which is not really kind of has any plot to it. This character, goes in a dream and he just goes through these different philosophical questions without any answer or resolution, just like asking all these different questions. And, one of the questions they ask in a small part of the film, go and watch it, is incredible. It's about free will and determinism. One person says, free will is, something that we don't have. We can't have free will. We're just a bunch of atoms. All of it is kind of determined by, all these things that we do. Another says, no, actually, we have free will because we can determine in the moment our consciousness, our awakened consciousness is what we kind of like understand about that. First, what did you think of the movie? But also, what do you think about that kind of specific problem?